everyone. Pull up a chair and get comfy.
Oh, girl, have we got stories to tell you all. The Never Alone podcast is about to begin, and you don't want to miss a minute.
Hey, welcome back. This is Iris Fisher-Smith with the Never Alone podcast, and my co-host, Karen Whitty, is with me again. And tonight we have a special guest. Her name is Amy Galant Rizzy, and she actually is a longtime family friend as well. Her mother and my mother were longtime friends. They were friends in high school way back in the 1940s. So Amy's going to have some fun stories to share about that. So Amy, would you like to start off by just mentioning how we know each other, just like I mentioned? And do you remember anything about how we first met?
Sure. How we know each other? Well, our mothers, like you said, went to high school together, and their class, the class of 1950, was a very tight class. And so I think they lived for their reunions every 5 years. And
Yeah.
and your mom and my mom were on the reunion committee. And so I would hear your mom's name pop up at times. But I think in 1993 was when my mom moved to the same town that your mom was living in. And that's when they really reconnected more. And I wasn't living in the country at the time. I was overseas.
What town was that?
Malden was
What town was that?
Malden,
Malden, Massachusetts, right?
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yes.
Massachusetts, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Malden, Massachusetts. So not too far from where they grew up, but then they lived much closer together. And I was living overseas at the time, so I didn't see your mom very often, but I would hear your mom's name pop up more and more. And your mom was actually at our wedding, my wedding, which was in Vermont in 1995. So she had met my husband, but I think the most memorable meeting was probably a year after our wedding. Your mom accompanied my mother to Logan Airport to pick us up. And if anyone knows Logan Airport, it's not that easy to park. So it's nice to have another person with you who can go in and meet whoever you're picking up while you're circling around so you don't have to pay for parking. And your mom went in to meet us while my mom was driving, and she saw us and she ran over to us and she gave my husband a big kiss on both cheeks, and she said, "Welcome to America." Which for my introverted husband was a very interesting introduction to extroverted. Let's put it that way. And so then my
Amy,
mom,
tell us where your husband's from.
my husband is from the Czech Republic. So that's where we lived for many years before we moved here.
Wow.
So then I started hearing Iris's name, that Charlotte's daughter, Iris. My mom would talk about Charlotte's daughter, Iris. And
Wow.
one year when we were visiting my mom, we actually met you. You were living on the Cape at the time. And you had a cookout.
Right, Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Yep. And you had a cookout for us, and we had a lovely time meeting you and your dog. My husband liked your dog, I remember. And so that was the introduction.
Yeah.
We got to know you.
So that was Cape Cod, Massachusetts, correct?
Yep.
For those viewers and listeners who don't know where geographically we're talking about. Yeah. Yeah. We're all from Massachusetts.
You guys get timeline?
What's that?
I was wondering if you could give me can you give me a little timeline? Like, I'm curious how old your moms were when they came to the airport to get you, because I have a visual of Iris's mother running through the airport, so I'm just very curious. And then, how old were you when you were living down the Cape? I'm just wondering
So let's see.
when that was.
Let's say 1997 or 96, and they were born in 33, so they were like 63 years old. They were in their early 60s.
Yeah.
Like us. Oh my gosh.
Our age. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, that's so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I was saying that we're all from Massachusetts. Of course, we're all living in different places now. We've got Karen living in Maine. We've got Amy who lives in the Boston area, and I'm over here in, Washington State. And here we are coming together. This is great, Tell me a little bit about your mother growing up, Amy, and when she might have met my mother for the first time when they were growing up,
Do you
because they were in school together.
do you know what street your mom lived on in Chelsea?
Maverick Street.
Maverick Street. So I think that was not too far away from where my mom grew up on Marlborough Street. So I don't know if they
Right,
met.
it wasn't. Yep.
I don't know if they met at elementary school. They probably both went to Shirtlift School, and definitely through high school.
My mother said something about kindergarten.
Kindergarten. Wow. Okay. Could
My
be.
mother said something about kindergarten. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they stayed in Chelsea, Massachusetts, where they grew up. And they just no, back then people did not move around like they do today.
Mhm.
So you have this whole class, right, that stayed together from the time they were in kindergarten. My mother told me that your mother and my mother met around the time of kindergarten.
Wow.
And then they kind of moved through school together and they interacted. And then they kind of went their separate ways for a little bit, just like me and Karen did. We interacted for a long time and then we kind of separated, and that's how people do it. But they stayed geographically in the same area, which brought them to the class, just sticking together, and it helped them in their elder years, right?
Sure. It did.
Yeah. What was some of the trips, Amy, that your mother and my mother used to do together? Because when they finally got together in the 90s, they were almost inseparable, weren't they? They went
They
everywhere
were.
together.
They were. Well, your mom was single, and my mom was single. And your mom's kids were grown and my mom's kids were grown. And so they really bonded, I think. And they would do trips to mostly visit you a lot because you moved around. So they would visit you at the
It
Cape
was fun.
and Vermont. And so, and my mom was the driver. You know, my mom was very proud that she got her license at 17 and had a perfect record. So she liked driving and she didn't mind driving.
Oh, cool.
So that one of the things that they liked doing was a once a year thing where they would go to New Hampshire for a church fair. It was like a Christmas fair they would have in early November, where the ladies in the church would make, homemade desserts, homemade lunch, homemade soup, and my mom would pick up your mom and my mom's sister-in-law and her sister-in-law's sister, and the four of them would drive up to New Hampshire and spend the day and buy Christmas gifts and homemade fudge and all that kind of stuff. And
I remember that.
yeah. So they actually even made it into the local paper, where it said, four childhood friends have been trekking up here for like a decade every year from the Boston area just to attend the fair. So they did a lot of fun things together.
Well, now
was
tell
that?
me, I'm sorry, Karen.
I'm wondering where
It
that
was
was.
in
New
It was in
Hampshire. That's neat.
Summersworth, New Hampshire. So
That's right.
Oh,
That's
funny.
right.
So what if that would be so fun
Yeah.
to see?
Okay, so Amy, I have another question, and this is a really cool one. In my book, I talk about the correlation between things that happened historically revolving around my own family's experience with history. And I think you know what I'm going to be talking about. Your mother and my mother went to school with who?
the Boston Strangler.
What a legacy. Anyway, what was his name? Do you remember?
Albert DeSalvo, or Al, they called him Al.
Yeah, yeah. And he was in their home room, I believe. And so my mother said that, they thought he was a little off, which would have made sense, but he didn't seem dangerous at the time, thank God. But when the 60s rolled around and he was in the news, their mouths dropped and they were like, oh my gosh, I sat next to him in homeroom, and they couldn't believe it, Well, wasn't there a time when your mother went on some kind of a tour on the bus? Can you tell us
Yeah,
about that?
Back in about 2007, I think, we had a good friend visiting from the Czech Republic who was about my mom's age. So they were touring around Boston together, and they took a Old Town Trolley tour. And the Old Town Trolley tour, you can, hop on and hop off. And they had a great day together. And they were going through Beacon Hill, and the driver, because they give a lot of historical information and anecdotes, the driver mentioned the Boston Strangler. And my mom, who actually
This is
just
great.
mentioned that she went to school with the Boston Strangler. And the driver was like, I need to talk to you. So then they had a conversation. Well, that was in 2007. And about 2 years ago, 2023, I was at a get together for a friend, and there were a lot of people there I didn't know, and we just got talking, and there was a man who's a Old Town Trolley driver. He drives one of the trolleys in Boston. And so I said, oh, my mom was on a trolley tour one time, and she really liked it. And I said, she mentioned that she went to school with the Boston Strangler. And he was like, no, you're the one. We still talk about her. So it was, what, over 15 years later that they were, and he pulls up his phone, and he's like dialing, and he's texting the driver, and he's saying, I'm standing here talking to the Boston Strangler lady's daughter. So my mom became,
Oh, no.
because they still talked about her. No. But the cool thing is, and this is a plug for Old Town Trolley tours,
Boston
is they
Strangler's
say that
daughter.
they really like to get to know personal connections. So to actually meet somebody who knew somebody, they like to infuse their presentations with those kind of personal connections. So, but I was like, wow, my mom's famous for the trolley tour people.
I don't know. I think your mother and my mother ended up in the newspaper a little bit more often than I care to admit. Because see, when your mother and my mother would drive, to your point, your mother always wanted to drive. There was a reason for that, because Karen, you probably remember this. My mother was like Mrs. Magoo driving. I've never seen it. I don't know how she didn't get killed. I could just picture her
What's
just
your
like the old cartoon Roadhog. That would be my mother, driving it in everybody's
funny.
face. Oh, she was something else. In her
She
elder years, what happened was, when she was getting a little dementia and she was still living in Boston, I let her drive one more time, and it was a mistake, because the next thing I knew, and I'm up in New Hampshire at the time, I get a phone call and she goes, Iris, I'm in trouble. And I said, what do you mean you're in trouble? What happened? Well, a policewoman was standing with her, and she got on the phone and she said, I just want to tell you that your mother really shouldn't be driving anymore. In fact, we have to revoke her license. They found her driving on a major highway. I think it was Route 128. Does that sound right?
It could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was driving the wrong way. It was by the grace of God that she did not get killed,
Yeah, totally.
So at
Yeah.
that point, I had to very gently say to her, Mom, why don't you come up and live with us? And I never took the keys away from her, but I kept the car in Boston and her in New Hampshire, and she could hold the keys all she wanted. I didn't have the heart to take away the keys, because that was her independence,
Mhm.
And I just kept saying to her, no, we have your car, and we'll get it to you. And I just kept putting it off, But yeah, she was a lot like Mrs. Magoo, even in her younger years, I don't know. She just was never a good driver. And I had so many family members that could attest to that. So anyway, so the next question I have is, back in the 1950s, when our mothers were graduating, okay, what do you remember from my book? Because you read my book, Amy, right?
Mhm.
What do you remember about what was popular with movies? What was trending back then? Do you have a copy of my book with you?
I do.
Because if not, if we
Yeah.
go to
Oh, there you go. Shameless plug.
because remember, in my book, I like to talk about history,
Mhm.
and what was happening during the different times I talk about that my family was living through. And this was back in the 1950s when my parents were engaged, actually. And so if you look at page 96, pull some of the things out of there that you think would be really interesting to people, I see one part where it talks about Doris Day, which Karen reminded me of Doris Day. She just looks like Doris Day. That's a compliment, by the way.
Yeah, my mom didn't talk about movies too much, but yeah, Audrey Hepburn, Jimmy Stewart, Lucille Ball, all those Alfred Hitchcock movies. Those are movies I like, classics, and that's way before my time. But
Yeah, me too.
so,
Alfred Hitchcock was really popular back then. Yeah, yeah. And then, yeah, his movies were like Vertigo, Dial M for Murder.
yep.
You know, do you remember? Well, then in the 1960s, Psycho came out, and that was pretty scary.
Yeah, and
Karen, do you remember Psycho?
I wasn't allowed to watch it. I did later, but
Yeah.
I do remember it. Yeah.
yeah, Vertigo is about
Well,
as
I didn't
much.
watch it as a little funny. Yeah, yeah, that was creepy. Vertigo, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and not to mention his episodes that were prevalent back then. You know, he had the Alfred Hitchcock Presents on television, and
Mhm.
television has a history of its own, and I do talk about that in my book. For those people who are interested in reading my book, I talk about the history of television and when it started, and the progression of it. Radio, different things like that. You know, Donna Reed with the show, that show was popular back then, Leave It to Beaver. Those were all our role models, and they were good role models. They had, it was like wholesome entertainment,
Sure.
The poor kids today, now they get Freddy Krueger, and it's not good. So anyways, Karen, do you have any questions for Amy?
Well, I'm curious. Well, I did a second ago. I think it just went out of my head. Okay, 2 seconds. I wanted to know, like, did you spend time together as like the moms and the kids together? Did you have those types of get-togethers, or was it later in life, or did you say that they kind of were together for a while and got back together later? Like, are you guys at different stages of family life? I know a lot of times it's commonality where your kids' ages are at and where you're going to be comfortable socializing. So I didn't know anything about that part.
Well, Iris's mom moved to Sharon or Canton, right? Canton and then Sharon. So anyone who knows Boston, you've got the North and you've got the South Shore, and to cross from the North Shore to the South Shore, there's a lot of traffic in between. And so I think that the time that
Oh,
you
yeah.
were living on the South Shore and us on the or my mom on the North Shore, they weren't connected as much. But then when your mom moved back to the North Shore, which is where my mom never left the North Shore. So that's where they really reconnected.
Go back to Malden.
Yeah, moved back to Malden.
Yeah.
I get
it.
That's why. All right, that makes sense. It's a true thing, though, too. People don't like to go. I never understood why anyone didn't want to come down from the North Shore to the South Shore in Massachusetts and Boston until I moved to the North Shore. Now I get it. It's like, oh, this is so much easier. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and also
Karen,
growing
you
up,
primarily lived in Sharon, right?
I'm sorry?
What did you say, Amy?
Oh, I said also growing up, we didn't have a car, so my mom wasn't very mobile in like the 60s or 70s to be able to
the
drive.
difference between being out in the suburb. Yeah, we were out in Cowling, and so you needed a car, and then you were more in the city area. Chelsea has changed greatly. Have you been there? Malden area, it's changed so much.
It has changed a lot.
Yeah, very neat.
It's been a while.
They've done a beautiful.
Yeah, my mother was the one
So
who
you were
was
saying
going. My mother was the one that was going back and forth between Sharon and Revere at the time when we lived in Sharon, because her mother lived in Revere, and so we had Mrs. Magoo going back and forth, and we were gritting our teeth every time she drove. It was she did it though. There was a couple of times she did have a little fender bender here and there, but we were really lucky. And back then, people smoked, so she was smoking cigarettes,
Yeah.
Little distraction.
That was a station wagon, wasn't it, Iris?
Yeah. Yep, we had a station
wagon. Yeah.
It's actually pictured in the book. We have a picture of it in the book.
Oh.
It's the one that
I'd have to
she's
look
in
it
the
up.
car.
But yeah, we had a station wagon.
There's one that
Say that again?
So there's a picture of she's in the car and you guys are standing in front of it or next to it. I think you and your siblings.
Yeah, but then there's also a 1966 or 1964 Country Squire station wagon. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. with no seatbelts.
Mhm.
They didn't have seatbelts. back
Remember?
then.
Yeah.
Please excuse this brief interruption for a shameless commercial. Remember, you can get your own copy of Iris's book, Never Alone, at irisfsmith.com.
So, Amy, you were telling me that one of your mother and my mother's really good friends, Jeannie Thompson,
Mhm.
just passed away recently.
Mhm.
And you were able to, talk at her funeral. Did you actually officiate the funeral?
Yes, I did. I was asked to. Her pastor was away at the time for a family emergency, so Jeannie's son asked me to officiate, which was really special.
Yeah. Was she one of the last
Wait.
classmates to go, Amy? I can't remember.
Well, Jeannie was actually a little bit older, but Jeannie and my mom grew up on the same street. And so they were friends from when my mom was 3 years old and Jeannie was 5 years old. So I actually have a picture of them when they were 3 and 5. And my grandmother wrote on the back of it that that was my mom's little friends from the street. So they were friends from that age until my mom passed away at age 80. And so it was really special to be able to talk about Jeannie. She wasn't my blood relative. She wasn't my real aunt, but we called her aunt because my mom married Jeannie's sister. So her sister was my aunt by marriage, but she wasn't. But we spent holidays together ever since I was a little kid. So they were really, really close. And she was one of the 4 that would go up to the fair every year with your mom and her sister, who was my aunt. So
I remember.
so they were really.
Yeah.
And Jeannie actually was on a bowling league with your mom for many years.
Yes. I remember
I
that.
can't picture your mother bolt. Sorry. That's hysterical. Sorry.
That's another
That's so
whole
funny.
episode. Mrs. Magoo goes bowling. All right.
Right.
For
It's
our
like watching my
listeners,
mother bolt.
for people who are listening, my mother was a Russian Yiddish woman, and she was so funny. And what was so funny about her, and I talk about her in the book, and Karen remembers her and Amy remembers her, is she didn't mean to be funny. And that's what was so funny. She was like a little caricature, remember the things she used to do. So
do.
at Jeannie Thompson's funeral,
Totally.
Amy, you referred to something in my book. Can you tell us about that when you were speaking?
I did. I referred to what I mentioned earlier, that they would go up to this fair every year, and that there was a newspaper article talking about the 4 friends who made the trip every year for over a decade. And then I mentioned that you had written a book called Never Alone about your mom and your mom's family, and that in it you wrote that your mom, Charlotte, left her with this philosophy that said you should never put yourself above anyone else. Put others first. And when you have a friend, you should be their friend for life. Loyalty is vital in any relationship. And I was able to share that I was a personal witness to this relationship that my mom and Jeannie had for, their entire life, where each one helped one another through the difficult times. So it was a blessing.
And that kind of leads into their class and then that whole community where they stuck together.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit more about how often they met as a class. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more on that?
Your mom and my mom's class, they met every 5 years, right? All the way through. But then the reunion committee, they would get together and they would plan the reunion. So they got together more and more often. And I think near the end, they got together more than every 5 years, because I think it might have been just every couple of years. And so I don't know if you have a
get older
of your mom's yearbook, but I have a copy of my mom's yearbook, and she kept tabs on everybody.
Cool.
But Yeah,
Yeah,
she always,
there was this whole thing.
always bragged about their class, about how many judges and doctors and lawyers and
Oh,
famous people, Hollywood actors were in their class. So
And you know something? They were such a tight community. They were more like family. You
Mhm.
talked about how Jeannie was like an aunt to you. Well, my mother grew up on the same street, the Maverick Street in Chelsea, Massachusetts,
Mhm.
with her friend Florence, which they called Fummy. I don't know if you remember that name. You probably do, Amy. Yeah. And she also was more like an aunt, a relative. They were like family. And Karen and I, growing up on the same street, we were like family.
Yep.
That's why I
Yeah.
wrote the book that I wrote, Never Alone, because it's so important to have community for the tough times and the good times, both,
Yeah.
you know, because life is going to come at us. And as it comes at us, it just is so much better if we have someone to hold our hand, someone to pray with us, someone to be with us, to get through those tough times. I've mentioned in other podcasts about how my grandmother came over during the Bolshevik Revolution. She came over alone at 18 years old after losing most of her family, as I've said before. And on the boat, see, the immigrants even stuck together. You had a woman that was from Armenia, you had a woman from Poland, and you had my grandmother from Russia. And they found each other on the boat and they stayed friends. I talk about this in the episodic series that I wrote. They had each other, they just clung to each other. You know, they came over on a really dirty boat. They were down in steerage, which is the lowest part of the boat, where it's very dirty. People were dying. It was during the pandemic. And so there's this whole thing about Ecclesiastes that I talk about in the book of Ecclesiastes. Two are better than one. For when one falls, the other one picks it up. God bless you.
thank you. Sorry.
And pity the man who's alone. And there's a reason that it says that, you know? What are we doing right now? We're supporting each other in this podcast and, you know, sharing our life with others. And it's like I've said also before that the whole reason I wrote this book initially was for my family, but it caught on so quickly. And now it's become my memoir, you know, my heartfelt memoir to the next generation, you know, to show them, you know, how important it is to connect. Because look what's happened with the pandemic and all these things. You know, it's like they were told to isolate and be by themselves. And it's funny because when the pandemic hit, that's when I started writing the book. And I kind of looked up and I said, hey, God, why am I writing a book about never being alone and connecting and community and we're all separating? You know, it didn't make any sense to me. But timing, right? You know, and there's so many people going out and saying, no, 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 we need to connect. You need to not isolate. It's very important to have friends and family, you know?
Yep.
So, you know, any thoughts on that? Either one of you?
I just think it's an amazing gift, friendships. I don't think I think lots of people realize what a blessing it is, but I don't think until you look back historically, you don't realize how there were no mistakes, the people that were placed in your life along the way, which is really very, very cool.
And you know what really touched me, Amy, was when my mother passed away. Do you remember who stood up with me on the altar? And Karen, you were there too. It was Amy's mother, because I wasn't doing well
Yeah.
physically, and she offered to stand with me, and she held my hand, and I felt so much better because I had support, you know, and my mother's good friend. And then you know what she said to me a couple of weeks later? She said, Iris, I miss my friend. And
She
then it
did.
wasn't
She
long
was
after
a lot.
that she yeah. And it wasn't long after that she got sick herself and then she passed away. You know,
Yep.
the timing, it was just, we lost both of them around the same time period. It was very hard.
Yep.
You know, I can kind of talk to that a little bit, you know,
Yep.
us being at the age we're at. So my mom is still here. I'm so thankful to have her, but they've lost a lot of friends and she talks about how it's interesting being prepared to know that she's aging and but there's a sadness and there's definitely you know, a grieving over what was and the friendships and not having that community the way she used to have it. It's and so it's become really important for us to spend time together. I know I'm not her peer friend, but we've always been friends as a mom and daughter, but I'm keenly aware that, we both get lonely. So just reaching out and watching all that. And as we get older, I think it's interesting. My mom's been very verbal about that. Your mom and both your moms must have talked about how wonderful it was to have each other. I mean,
Oh,
that just
yes.
sounds amazing to me to stage of life and to have that special person, because I have other women in my life who are 10, 20 years older, and they would die for companionship, just some type of companionship. They're lonely. And what a blessing that is.
It's true.
Yeah, good point. And in all the different stages of life, when you're a toddler, you need friends. When you're in, elementary school, you need friends. They're very important. But it becomes different. And even in your old age, it's still important to have those friends and long-term friends, that know you, that know what makes you tick,
Yeah.
Karen and I have known each other since she was 5 and I was 8. We're like, the Jeannie and Barbara or Fumi and Charlotte's of the world. We're the next generation that did that,
That's great.
and our kids will probably follow suit. We hope. We hope for that and we pray for that so that they're not alone, So, anyway, any other thoughts?
No, I thought that was great. You just pray for those, to have great friendships too, to have those come alongside of them, and who would think, back when we were 5 and 3, we'd be sitting here doing this. It's like, what? Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Looking and acting just like our mothers.
I know.
Oh my God, I hope I don't look like Mrs. McCoy. Do you guys remember?
I don't know if she told you, so
Huh?
Did you tell Amy, though, my relationship with Charlotte was very different, because most of the time I spent the time with her saying, Karen, go home. It was like, so I had this thing where I thought she didn't talk a whole lot. It was usually telling me to go home.
Well, that was because we were.
Iris, what are you?
You know why? Because it was always
sorry.
it was always after school, and we had playtime.
Oh yeah, we were in trouble.
Yeah, and then we would have, it was dinner time and then homework time, and that's why. She didn't have a vendetta
Well,
against.
and I didn't like your mom. Your mom was working really hard, and we'd be after school, and we'd come home and we had made a disaster in the kitchen or something, and so she wasn't quite. That was pretty funny. So
That was that too.
she always made me laugh.
Well, to make you feel a little better, Karen, Alan, my brother Alan, okay, who we're going to have on the podcast later, used to come home when he was probably about 13 with his boyfriends, okay? And they were 13-year-old boys that were very hungry, all right? When my mother would go out on this shopping trip and they went home alone, and she'd come back to a kitchen that was cleaned out. So they just ate everything like bears, And so the deal is, you want to say, she came in one afternoon to these 5 boys and she said, everybody go home. There was no food left.
Yeah.
So she didn't just do that to you.
Oh no, it was all right. It didn't hurt my feelings by any means. I just got fine. I'll go home. It's like
you and everybody else.
One of my favorite quotes from your mom, Iris, was that your sister had kids a lot earlier, and your son was a lot older than my kids. So my mom became a grandmother much later than your mom did. And I guess my mom commented on that once when I had my first child, and she said, I'm going to be so old, or like I had to wait so long for our grandkids, and your mom, without missing a beat, she goes, that's fine. You'll enjoy them while they're young. And when they're teenagers and causing problems, you'll be senile and you won't know what's going on.
That was my mother. She was really blunt.
You'll be oblivious.
And you won't know what's going on. It'll be great. Amy, can you think of any other funny stories before we, sign off for the evening?
Ooh, I don't know. Your mom was bigger than life. So they just,
Even though she was under 5 feet.
yeah, done. True. But she's just a lovely person. She was so fun and so just full of life and joy and faithful. She and my mom all those years, probably, yeah, 20 years, I think, when they lived close to each other. Those last 20 years, they were just so tight and calling each other on the phone all the time and getting together and
All the time.
Mm-hmm. So it was,
Did they call you a lot, Amy? Because they used to call me a lot. Did they call you a lot?
no, because I was overseas.
Together?
Wow. You're oblivious.
Offensive.
You're oblivious.
But your mom went through a messy, a sticky divorce, and my mom was was left as a single mom a lot earlier than that too. And so your mom and my mom, they were both really tough. They were tough but they weren't complainers. So they supported each other, but it was this,
No.
that's life, and you move on and you help your friends, and they weren't whiners or complainers, but they were there for one another. So I think that's really special.
Yeah, and amen. And the thing is, they weren't afraid of hard work.
Mhm.
Because I'll tell you, with all the things they went through, and if you get my book, you can read about some of these things that they went through. Instead of complaining, like you said, they just did it. They dug their heels in and they became stronger. And you know what makes people strongest? Thinking about the other person.
Mhm.
I've said this so many times in other podcasts, we don't get from taking, we get from giving. And the cure for depression is to reach out,
Mhm.
and, so on that note, I want to thank you, Amy, for coming on tonight. I appreciate it very much. Karen, it's great to see you again. And so until our next,
Thanks for letting me live.
yeah. Well, you,
No, that was to listen to you guys. It was fun. I thank you. I appreciate being able to be part
Yeah,
of
thanks
it.
for inviting me too.
well, your laughter helps. Anyway, until next time, if you want to, see more about my book, hear more about the up and coming episodic series that we have written that goes along. It's an adaptation of the book. There it is. Amy's holding it up. You can go to irisfsmith.com, and after we get off, you'll see two lovely young lady doggies talking about our episodic series and the podcast. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
See you
Yeah,
next
bye-bye.
week.
Wow, that was awesome, wasn't it?
I know those stories were really something.
Hey, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time when we share more stories from Iris's book, Never Alone.
Order your copy of Never Alone at irisfsmith.com today.